achieved.
Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson. And on this episode of the show, we're breaking down the upcoming UFC Fight Night 60 event, which will take place in Bloomfield, Colorado, and feature the third installment of its main event. This one featuring Benson, Henderson, moving up to welterweight to take on Brandon Thatch. I'll get to all of my predictions, as I normally do, 6 main card predictions, along with the preliminary predictions that will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net. But I quickly want to talk about 2 things. The first is, I've recently set up a deal with affiliation with DraftKings. It's you probably see a lot of that floating around. You see it in the UFC Octagon, all over sporting events. It's a really cool fantasy sports competition. You can check out all the details on my website. I'll give you just a gist of it. The current game that's set up for your Ultimate Fight Night, or UFC Fight Night 60. It's a $2 buy-in unless you make upon your first deposit, you actually can get in free. First prize is $5,000. You're simply picking 5 fighters, and it pays the top 4,000 people. Second prize is $1,500 all the way down. So it's a pretty cool thing. If you click on the banner on my website, you can get all the information and sign up. And I definitely urge you to check it out, especially if you're not into the hardcore gambling, but still want to have some fun picking fighters and backing guys more than just enjoying the fights. I would certainly look into that's DraftKings.com, or just go to kamikazeoverdrive.net. And you can get follow my website, click on the banners, and it'll take you to that information. The other thing I want to talk about quickly before we move on is just the garbage that's gone on recently with not Nick Diaz, but Anderson Silva. Nick Diaz popped for pot, not surprisingly. But for Anderson Silva getting popped for steroids, that's disappointing for him. But more importantly, I hear all this stuff, it takes time, but the tests in, but this is ridiculous. I really think that the Athletic Commission looked at this and said, you know what, if we let Anderson Silva fight and we'll get him after the fight, we can collect a significant amount of money from his paycheck, because if we stop the fight from happening, he's not going to get paid. Same thing, the UFC made massive money off of the pay-per-view buys and everything else that goes along with this card. Had they lost the main event because of the drug test, Kelvin Gastelum, a blown-up Kelvin Gastelum taking on Tyron Woodley, would have been a pretty subpar main event. So I don't know. I don't want to say conspiracy or say these guys were in cahoots with one another, but it's really disappointing to see the way this played out. Because had it been a lower-level fighter, I almost guarantee the fight would have been kibosh before the actual event started. So it looks bad overall, and it's too bad for Anderson Silva, and I don't have any sympathy for the guy. He's cheated, he's been caught, and it's time to just admit it and move on. Either way, we have 6 pretty decent fights for the main card, so let's get to that first prediction. Our opening prediction of the evening takes place in the UFC's flyweight division as Ray, the Taz-Mexican Borg, 7-1-0, battles Chris, the Greek assassin Kelades, with a current record of 8 wins and just a single defeat. Now, both guys made their official UFC debuts on short notice. That's how they got their push into the promotion. Borg lost to the very much unheralded Dustin Ortiz, while Kelades was upset the heavily favored Patrick Houlihan. Borg's actually fought a second fight since his debut, which he got a full camp for, and he defeated his opponent. For Kelades, he's getting his first full camp for a UFC fight in this matchup. Now, this is actually kind of playing like a mini tournament within the flyweight division. We had Chris Kelades taking on Patrick Houlihan, and Ray Borg took on Shane Howell. Howell and Houlihan both lost. They just fought, and Houlihan beat Shane Howell. So this kind of serving as the de facto tournament finals, and potentially the winner getting a nice little push up the rankings, or at least up in the competition level. Physically, Kelades is going to have a 3-inch height advantage and a 5-inch reach advantage, so he will be the bigger man. For Ray Borg, he's a grappling machine. 5 of the 7 wins have come by submission. All 5 of those wins have come by rear naked choke, including his UFC win over Shane Howell, and he has multiple. But the thing is, keep in mind, Shane Howell had multiple rear naked choke defeats, so it seems to be a vulnerability of his. Now, Borg, was very impressive against Dustin Ortiz. He landed 5 of 8 takedown attempts. He attempted multiple subs, passed his guard several times. And in the Howell fight, he only needed 1 takedown to secure the submission, which was very impressive. In that fight, he landed a quick single leg. He's very good at smothering his opponent, has excellently slick transitions. And when he fought Howell, he transitioned to the back very quickly, and in the process, snaked his arm underneath his chin and put the quick RNC in for the victory. Against the Ortiz fight, he had a couple of close sub attempts, couldn't finish, and ultimately lost that matchup on the feet. He was outlanded 107-21, which is certainly concerning, and that's where Chris Kelades needs to have success in this matchup, is on the feet if he's going to be victorious. For Kelades, he has 2 wins by TKO, which both came very early in his career. He showed serviceable striking versus Paddy Houlihan in his debut, but he relied heavily on his grappling. Now, unfortunately for Kelades, he was taken down 3 times. He did have success when he was able to get on top, but he was put in some bad positions, especially early on in that matchup. He struggled tremendously in round 1 as it was taken down at his back take and nearly caught in a close rear naked choke. And ultimately, the bell saved him in that matchup. the Irishman in that fight made some bad positional mistakes that gave Kelades the advantage and allowed him to get on top and used his size from top position, and that was a big factor here, and he could very much smother Borg if he is able to get there. Houlihan was able to dictate the pace against Kelades and put the fight on the mat with way too much success, which is way too concerning for me when you're taking on a guy of Ray Borg's grappling quality. If you spend too much time in the mat with Borg, it's going to be deadly. He's incredibly smooth. He's a submission threat from all positions. And Borg, he has 2 late second-round wins and a decision win, which shows he has the ability to finish fights beyond just the first round. And the experience, I think, of losing to Dustin Ortiz was big, and it really helps round out a fighter. And I think he simply is the better fighter here. So my prediction is Ray Borg to defeat Chris Kelades by submission. In the UFC's lightweight division, Michel Tractor Prazeres, 18-1-0, battles Kevin, the Motown phenom Lee, with a record of 9-1. It's a pretty impressive record so far on the card. Now, both guys lost for the very first time in their careers in their UFC debuts, but have rebounded nicely since then. Both fighters are currently riding 2-fight winning streaks, and both include split decision wins over Jesse Ronson, so you kind of see where the matchmakers paired these two up. Both guys, I keep saying both a lot, they seem to lean heavily on their takedown games, at least against Ronson they did. Prazeres landed 7 takedowns. Well, he was outstruck by a total of 38-19 in that matchup. For Lee, he landed 4 takedowns and slightly edged out Ronson with a 49-48 edge and significant strikes. So both guys emerged with very tight but still victorious performances. Physically, a 3-inch height and 10-inch reach advantage for Lee. He is the bigger man. For Michel Prazeres, he's coming off an 11th-month layoff, so he's been out of action for a little bit. And he's also fighting outside of Brazil for just the second time in his career, and it's the first time that he has actually competed in the U.S., which is something to consider as well. For Lee, this is his first fight in 5 months, so it gives you an idea there. He's fighting on a more regular schedule as far as that is concerned. For Lee, overall, 4 wins by submission, 5 by decision, versus Prazeres, 1 knockout victory, 8 submissions, and 9 decisions. Lee is a former NCAA Division II wrestler, and Prazeres a very capable BJJ player, so both grappling-based. I've kind of driven that point home here. For Prazeres, he's a limited striking attack. He did land 35 significant strikes against Mirbek Taisumov, and that's his high watermark, compared to Lee, who's landed totals of 74, 49, and 39 in his 3 UFC fights, 39 coming against Ali Quinton, his debut defeat. He can put up better striking numbers overall. Continuing on with the stats, Prazeres a negative 0.57 striking exchange rate, while Lee not quite 1 strike more per minute than against his opponents, but still he's quite close. Overall, Lee has the much more complete striking game. He's the busier striker, and he's also going to be aided by a fairly significant reach advantage, which should show up. 10 inches is a big reach advantage as he and Prazeres exchange. For the Brazilian, he has to get this fight to the ground, and I really think Lee's wrestling is going to make it difficult for him to do it with consistency. I'm not saying he won't be able to take him down, but I think it's going to be difficult for him to do it with consistency. We really haven't seen a ton of Lee's defensive wrestling, though, as guys really haven't challenged him. And Prazeres taking down Taisumov 3 times was very impressive. Mirbek Taisumov is a very good wrestler, and Prazeres able to out-grapple him was pretty darn impressive. A big red flag in this matchup, though, is the cardio of Prazeres. It's a major concern under normal conditions, and he slowed down in past fights. He slowed down tremendously in the 3rd round against Jesse Ronson, which allowed Ronson to make it much closer. And in that fight, he threw a lot of takedowns. 15 attempts, landed 7 takedowns. It really was quite taxing. Fighting away from home for just the second time is a major concern. As I said, first time in the USA, that can be difficult on a fighter who has questionable cardio. And the big thing is here, he's fighting at altitude in Colorado, which can be very difficult. It can be hard. It's going to be hard on both men, but I think Prazeres, he's a little bit more more physically muscle-bound. That's going to show up a little bit more. Prazeres overall is 9-1 in fights that go the distance, but this is a different situation here. I think Lee's going to keep Prazeres on the outside, jab him, wear him down, use a higher striking rate than Prazeres can match up, defend the takedowns, make him work very hard to get them. And my prediction is... what is my prediction? I forgot to write that down. My prediction is Kevin Lee to defeat Michel Prazeres by decision. Fight number 3 on the main card is kind of a questionable one as far as its inclusion on the main card. It's in the UFC's middleweight division. It's undefeated Dan Kelly with a record of 8-0 takes on 5-2 Patrick Walsh. Now, both guys are tough alumni that didn't fare so well in the show, and both making their second UFC appearances here. Kelly, actually pulled off a pretty impressive submission in his debut over a fairly low-ranking fighter. Walsh picked up a dominant but not too exciting decision victory in his debut, and he did it over a light heavyweight in a division above. Now, Walsh, they said, cutting down the light heavyweight for the first first time, but Kelly will be 1 inch taller. Walsh will have a slight 3-inch reach advantage. And keep in mind as well, Patrick Walsh is 11 years younger than Dan Kelly, so certainly age and time is on his side. For Patrick Walsh, he's an NCAA Division I wrestler, BJJ purple belt. Dan Kelly, an Olympic judokan, 4 Olympic appearances from 2000 to 2012. His highest finish was a 7th place finish in 2004, so he's a very much accredited grappler as well. Walsh likes to use big takedowns, really likes the Kimura. He only has 1 professional win, but he likes to threaten with it. It seems to be a move of choice that he will go to. He does a nice job with punching and changing levels, looks for that single leg, will run the pipe, or elevate his opponent, look to slam him down. From top position, he really likes to hold on to it, grind and chip away at his opponents. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Jared Roshold a little bit in that sense. Has scored TKO wins both as an amateur and a pro, and the way he does, he just keeps chipping away at guys and dropping on. He sees them start to break and starts to pick up the intensity. For Dan Kelly, 7 of his 8 wins have come by finish, 5 by submission, 3 of those wins by rear naked choke, and as I said, he picked up a Kimura victory over Luke Zacharich in his debut. He uses striking to set up his judo base, throws, and trips, what he primarily uses for takedowns. He likes to close the distance behind that striking, but he was taking some big shots against Zacharich early on, and he tends to leave his chin up when he does come forward. Works the uppercuts and dirty boxing in close, hits fairly hard. He's a very big, strong man, but not a ton of technique behind his striking. And there are some defensive gaps in there. Now, Kelly has gone 3 rounds just once in his career, and that was 3 years ago. And overall, he's undefeated against lower-level competition and the aforementioned Zacharich, who is, high-end, lower-level competition, we'll put it that way. Now, keep in mind, on The Ultimate Fighter, he got absolutely blasted by Sheldon Westcott. He was injured, apparently, during the fight. He was injured during the fight, which kind of hurt him a little bit, but still, it wasn't a very impressive performance. Walsh started his pro career with 4 straight first-round fights, which is, he's that first-round finishing type, but he's won his last 2 matchups by decision, which is something you want to see out of a fighter, the ability to not, beat guys without putting them away in the first round. I think Kelly's judo will offer a stout defense for Walsh's wrestling and the ability to take this fight to the mat. If Kelly can't finish in the first round, I think he's going to start to slow down. That age, that lack of long fight experience, plus the high altitude issue will all play a major factor. I think Walsh's weight cut and lack of a really strong striking game is a concern, but he has an excellent chin, and that should allow him to get on the inside against Kelly and not take too much damage. If Kelly can't put Walsh on his back, it will take the wrestler out of his element and put him in a position he's not familiar with. That's a big if. A late TKO is possible, but my prediction is Patrick Walsh to defeat Dan Kelly. I'll take Walsh by decision. We move now to the UFC's welterweight division for the 4th fight on the main card as Neil Magny, 13-4-0, takes on 18-5-2 with 1 single no contest, Kiichi Strasser Kunimoto. Coming to this matchup, both guys are on fairly improbable runs. Kunimoto has won 3 straight in the UFC, but it's kind of one of those iffy winning streaks. He's won 1 fight by DQ. He pulled off an upset over a very drained Daniel Sarafian and a controversial decision win over Richard Walsh. For Magny, he's kind of a success story of late. He lost in the Ultimate Fighter semifinals on a very bad season. I believe he's the only man from that show still fighting. He started his UFC career with a record of 1-2, but since then he's won 5 in a row with multiple upsets and looked very good and constantly shows improvement. Physically, Magny's going to have a 5-inch height advantage and a 9-inch reach advantage. The Japanese fighter overall, 9 wins by submission. Magny's big win total is decisions with 7, and he has 4 wins by knockout, but 2 of his last 3 victories have come by stoppage, which is pretty darn impressive. He's vastly improving his striking. The striking exchange rate overall certainly favors the American here. Kunimoto a negative 0.91 striking exchange rate. For Magny, positive 1.83, meaning he outlands his opponents by almost 2 strikes per minute more than they're able to hit him. Now, Kunimoto has had trouble covering the distance in some of his matchups, especially against Patrick Walsh, and he was getting stuck on the outside a little bit. He was hurt twice in the first round against Walsh. Walsh landed a nice punch in that matchup, and later on a knee was a kick, but he caught him with the knee in the fight and hurt him. Kunimoto tends to lift his head up when he's under attack. His offensive output really builds off his jab, punches way into the clinch, lands short strikes, but he's not a very good distance striker. He had his greatest success against the Aussie when he pinned him on the cage, used his clinch, changed levels for takedowns. He primarily focuses on a single leg, and he didn't have a ton of success until Walsh started to slow down in that fight. For Neil Magny, combination striking and distance striking are his keys to success, and he's really improved both of them significantly. He's outlanded his last 5 opponents by a total of 235 strikes to just 98. He's using his jab much more effectively and getting full extension on his strikes without overextending himself and leaving him open for counters. And against William Macario, he drastically limited his offensive output. He prevented him from closing the distance, and Macario only landed 31% of his strikes, which tells you that he was doing a lot of swinging and missing. For Magny, the power seems to be coming along as well. Nice combinations with sizable volume. He's kind of a death by accumulation guy, but he can pack a decent punch behind his strikes. The key to his success here is he must shut down Kunimoto's grappling game. 70% takedown defense for Magny, which is pretty darn impressive. But he has been taken down a fair bit. 12 takedowns in his last 6 fights. But he's able to get back up and do damage in the feet. And, 12 takedowns in his last 6 fights, but he's won 5 of them, which shows you, it's a pretty good number there. He has a pretty good sprawl. He can go offensive with his top game if he does get in top position. But he would be better served by focusing primarily on his defense. For Kunimoto, he landed 1 of 10 takedowns against Richard Walsh, which is not an impressive number. He did show some good submission skills when he tapped with Daniel Serafian, but that, it hasn't been consistent enough with his wrestling or grappling game to really rely on that. For Magny, he still needs to be mindful of his defensive grappling. He can't overextend himself or put himself in a position to be taken down. But I think his reach, his technical striking is going to keep Kunimoto out of range. Walsh showed he's very hittable and can be hurt, and I think Magny's going to be able to put it on him. And my prediction is Neil Magny to defeat Kiichi Kunimoto by TKO. In the co-main event, we are in the UFC's featherweight division. The 13th ranked Max Blessed Holloway, 11-3-0, battles longtime UFC veteran Cole McGreenho Miller with a current record of 21 wins and 8 defeats. This is a big fight for both men. Miller's still trying to crack that top 15 in the division he's moved down to after spending a long run at the UFC, in the UFC's lightweight division. For Max, he's trying to add another big name to a resume that's growing more and more impressive with each appearance. Both men are very tall and rangy fighters for the division. Miller, surprisingly, will be 2 inches taller and will have a sizable 6-inch reach advantage. Now, both guys have a very clear path to victory, and they're going to be hard-pressed to win this fight if they don't get the contest in the realm, their realm of dominance. For Max Holloway, he needs to keep this fight vertical, and for Cole Miller, he needs to get Holloway on the floor. Pretty simple. Miller, he's a BJJ black belt. 15 of his 21 wins have come by submission, including 7 in the UFC, and only one of his last I think it's 8 or 7 UFC wins was not by submission, which was a decision win over, I believe it was Andy Ogle. He has an excellent top game, good transitions, long limbs make him very difficult to deal with on the mat. He's very active, averaging 2.3 subs per fight, and we did see Max Holloway get submitted by Dustin Poirier in his debut. Now, Miller's takedown style, he'll change levels for a takedown, try to pin his opponent on the cage, get in deep, and look to drag him to the fight, or drag him to the mat. He's never been subbed overall, which is pretty darn impressive, but that's where some of the red flags pop up. He's 3-6 in fights that go the distance, and 6-8 overall in fights that do not end by submission. So those are some concerning numbers if he's unable to get the tap out. He averages just 0.5 takedowns per fight at a 29% completion rate, which are pretty weak numbers if you're a fighter who lives and dies with the submission game. He has never landed more than 1 takedown in the UFC fight, and he relies solely on, or not solely, but highly on his opponents to take the fight to the ground, and then for him to start working, his takedown game, or his grappling game. And this could be a concern against Max Holloway for one of 2 reasons. Number one, Holloway's not the type of guy who's going to try for takedowns. He's not the guy who will do a reactionary takedown, see an opening and try and take his opponent down, and then Miller can capitalize. That's not going to happen. Max is going to see an opening, and he's going to stick a bunch of punches in it. That's how he works. For the second reason, Max Holloway has drastically improved his counter wrestling and his ability to fend off takedown attempts and make it difficult for guys to put him on his back. He's got a 76% takedown defense. He showed incredibly strong TDD against Dennis Bermudez, but he was taken down several times by Conor McGregor as the only man to go the distance with him, but he spent most of that fight on his back, or at least most of the second half of the fight on his back. He did also earn a submission win against Andre Fili, but he would be incredibly foolish to do anything other than defend on the mat and focus on getting back to his feet. Now for Max Holloway, he's a striking-based fighter. High volume and improving KO, TKO ability, really working on rounding with that killer instinct. 5 knockouts overall, 3 in his last 4 fights, much like Neil Magny, really finding his stride. He's a death by accumulation guy, 5.86 strikes landed per minute. He does get tagged at a rate of 3.98, but he seems to be a guy who can limit the impact of his opponent's strikes. 69% takedown defense, good distance management, 69% striking defense, good distance management, excellent timing, and he doesn't overextend himself when he attacks. He's constantly working at a rate and in a method that is, doesn't leave him open for a lot of counters. Conversely, he can counter-strike as well. He mixes up his attacks incredibly well. He'll go to the body with spinning back kicks and nasty left hooks to the body, and it's just something he can do very effectively. He can take away an opponent's gas tank. For Cole Miller, he has been KO'd twice. He's a little bit chinny for my liking. Now he has improved his striking. He will have a reach advantage, and he's using his jab and that reach advantage a little more effectively of late. But again, he's a guy who gets hit more than he hits, and that's certainly concerning. And it's not a good number against a guy like Holloway who can really up that number and put it on you. Overall, Miller has had trouble with guys who can put up big striking numbers. He lost a Nam fan with a where Fan landed 129 strikes. Steven Siler he lost to, landed 81, and Matt Wyman had kept a high pace with 76 significant strikes landed. He lost all those matchups, and those are certainly concerning. Additionally, Miller seems to slow down in the third round. Even in fights where he's winning and setting the pace, it seems to cost him later in that match. I think Max Holloway's pace is going to be difficult for him to keep up with. I think the damage is going to pile up, and I think Cole's going to tax himself looking for takedowns early on, and also keep in mind that Denver elevation. Now, Max could be in trouble. He will be in trouble if he gets taken down. He needs to get back up, but it's a big if. I think the distance and timing will make it hard for Cole to get in with effectively and be consistent. To get in effectively and be consistent with it. I think Max Holloway simply is too much for Cole Miller here. I look for him to target the body a lot, and my prediction is Max Holloway to defeat Cole Miller by TKO. In the main event of the evening, we have an absolute head-scratcher. We're in the UFC's welterweight division as the number 5 ranked lightweight and former lightweight champion, Benson Smooth Henderson, 21-5-0, battles rising prospect Brandon Ruckus Thatch with a current record of 11 wins and a single defeat. Now, Thatch, he's fighting at home in Denver. That's the first thing you keep in mind. He will be the home field advantage in this matchup. Henderson moving up from lightweight. He was a big lightweight, but by no stretch massive in the sense that he's not going to show up here. He's taking this fight on 2 weeks' notice, a little less than a month from his last appearance, and he lost that appearance or matchup to a man who took that fight on 2 weeks, noticed Cowboy Donald Cerrone. So certainly kind of an interesting, tat-for-tat exchange there. Thatch, for him, he hasn't fought in almost 15 months. This is a late opponent change, a very different opponent than who he was preparing for. It's also only his third UFC fight, and on top of all that, it's been promoted to the main event, the big stage. It was co-main event, and it's been promoted up. So a lot of pressure there for a young fighter. This is a big fight for Thatch. Taking on a former champion, only 12 pro bouts into his career, third in the UFC, so a huge opportunity for him. Also a big fight for the former champ as well. He's lost 2 in a row, 3 of his last 5. He was kind of robbed against Donald Cerrone, but arguably stole a win against Josh Thompson, so it kind of all turns out in the wash. Physically, not surprisingly here, though, the natural welterweight have a 5-inch height advantage and a 2-inch reach advantage. Now, Thatch, when he fought Justin Edwards, he really dwarfed Edwards and really bullied him around in the cage, and his height and reach advantage allowed him to land big knees and kicks that put Edwards down. And keep in mind, Ben Henderson is an inch taller, at least on record, an inch shorter, than Justin Edwards. So if you watch that fight, you should get an idea where Henderson will come in against Brandon Thatch physically. Some of the weapons Thatch throws, he throws a lot of them. A nice, brutal right knee strike, body and head kicks, slick combinations. He's an incredibly aggressive striker. He looks to overwhelm his opponent with pressure and early pace. He uses all his weapons incredibly effectively, knees, elbows, punches, kicks. In that matchup against Paulo Thiago, he landed a beautiful body kick, followed up with a vicious knee to the body, and that was all she wrote in that matchup. And he just keeps coming forward with pure destruction. One thing, though, to keep in mind, he's never been outside of the first round. In victory, he's never been outside of the first round, and that's fantastic for a young fighter. But at the same time, it really brings to question what happens when he does go outside of the first round. The one time he did, he lost a split decision way back in 2008, fighting under the Strikeforce banner, no less. And it's been a long time since he's been forced and really tested by anyone. For Benson Henderson, to keep things in perspective, he's got a decision 12 times. He's won 10 of them. 10 of his last 13 fights have gone to decision, and then on top of that, he has a 4-round fight against Rustam Havilov, which he won by submission, and 6 of those fights have gone the distance of 5 rounds. So this guy has a ton of elongated fight experience. Additionally, he'll have a massive overall experience advantage of 26 fights to 12, and he's been fighting at a championship caliber, a championship level compared to Brandon Thatch, who's been fighting lower level guys and working his way up the ranks. For Benson, he's a solid kicking game, taekwondo background. We saw him utilize a lot of kicks against Donald Cerrone. He used that front leg oblique or side kick to the lead leg of Cerrone, maybe a little bit too much, which is a little bit concerning, especially against Brandon Thatch, who could counter with some strong, with his reach advantage. And that's one thing, when Benson did throw it, Cerrone landed some nice counter strikes off. It didn't hit them all, didn't land all of them flush, but still they were landing and keeping him backed up. Benson should have the speed advantage here. He feels overall like he'll be quicker, more aggressive, and not nearly as strained, not having to cut down, because he walks around, they said, at 175 to 178, so really it's a minimal weight cut for him. Big comfort level advantage as well for Henderson, having just fought just over, I think it's 28 or 26 days ago, versus the big layoff that Brandon Thatch is returning with. Thatch's style has proven to be too much for lower level, past their prime opponents, but this is not what he's facing. He's facing a championship level opponent no matter what size he's fighting at, but the biggest concern for Henderson nonetheless is the size going to be too much for him? Brandon Thatch is a big welterweight, and that's hard to gauge in this fight. Henderson, for my money, has to survive the early flurry, drag this fight into a realm where Thatch is not accustomed to competing, Can he keep the pace that Ben's going to set? The speed of Benson Henderson, I think, is going to be a major factor here. 2 of Ben's last 3 losses have come in the first round, which shows he can be shut down against RDA and Anthony Pettis, so he can be finished. I don't think that's going to be the case here. Ben was tagged with some shots against Donald Cerrone, but he avoided a lot too. The big question is, I think his speed should make him be able to avoid more shots in this fight, but at the same time, if he gets tagged with a welterweight, impact from a welterweight striker, is it going to be one and done? Or will it put him, on the verge of being put out? I think you have experience and speed in Henderson's side, taking on aggression, power, and size with Brandon Thatch. Here in this fight, he's the underdog, but I'm going to go with the former champion here. I'm going to take Benson Henderson to defeat Brandon Thatch. He could pull off a late stoppage if he can wear him out, but I've got Benson Henderson to pull off a minor upset and defeat Brandon Thatch by decision. So those are my 6 main card predictions for Ultimate Fight Night 60. It should be a fairly interesting fight card. We've lost a little bit of steam losing the main event and then having this kind of weird fight where Benson Henderson is fighting at welterweight. Either way, it'll be a fun fight nonetheless. A lot of these cards that don't have the big marquee names on it tend to produce some very interesting and very entertaining matchups, we'll say the least. The bet packs will be for sale. I will make sure I honor my $5 half off price for those people who bought the last bet pack. If I don't send it to you, email me and I will send it to you. I probably sent it to the wrong email address. I usually send it to the one attached to your PayPal account. Nonetheless, thank you very much for listening. It's been a long show, and we will, lots of fights on deck. I feel incredibly rusty. You can probably notice that through my voice. Nonetheless, take care, guys. Thanks for listening. Talk to you later.